August 14th, 1974. Elvis Presley was trapped in the back of his Cadillac, crawling through Memphis traffic, and he was done. Done with the executives. Done with the pressure. Done with being told his music wasn't young enough, wasn't commercial enough, wasn't what America wanted anymore. Just hours earlier, he'd walked out of another soul-crushing meeting at RCA where suits half his age lectured him about demographics and radio play. At 39, the king of rock and roll felt like a prisoner in his own empire. Every song had to be market-tested. Every lyric had to appeal to teenagers who didn't even know who he was anymore. The irony wasn't lost on him. The same industry that had begged him to tone down his revolutionary sound 20 years ago was now begging him to find it again. But how do you rediscover magic when everyone around you has forgotten what magic looks like? His driver Joe navigated the sluggish traffic near Beale Street, while Elvis stared out the tinted windows at his hometown. Memphis had made him, but lately, it felt like Memphis was the only place that still remembered who he really was. Not Elvis the brand, not Elvis the Vegas act, but Elvis the kid who just wanted to make music that mattered. That's when he heard it. A single guitar cutting through the humid air like lightning through storm clouds. Not the polished, studio-perfect sound he was drowning in every day, but something raw, something real, something that made his chest tighten with recognition. The melody was hauntingly familiar, yet completely transformed. It was Amazing Grace, but not like any version he'd ever heard. This wasn't the sanitized hymn from Sunday services or the overdone gospel arrangements from recording sessions. This was Amazing Grace, bleeding with the kind of pain and hope that could only come from someone who'd actually been lost and found. Elvis felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Curiosity, genuine burning curiosity about who was making this sound. "Stop the car," he said suddenly. Joe glanced in the rearview mirror, confused. They were still blocks from Graceland, caught in the middle of downtown traffic. "Sir?" "Stop the car, Joe. Right here. Pull over." But Elvis was already leaning forward, his entire body oriented toward that sound. He could feel it in his bones, the way music used to affect him before contracts and lawyers and image consultants got between him and the songs. This was music that didn't care about demographics. Music that didn't know it was supposed to be commercial. As Joe maneuvered toward the curb, Elvis's mind raced back to his own beginning. To Sun Records and Sam Phillips. To the day he walked into that studio with $4, supposedly to record a song for his mother, but really because he had something inside him that was going to explode if he didn't let it out through music. When was the last time he'd felt that urgency? That desperate need to express something true? The guitar continued, and now he could hear the voice more clearly. Young, male, untrained by any vocal coach, but trained by life itself. Every note carried weight. Every pause felt intentional, not because it was calculated, but because the emotion demanded it. This wasn't someone performing for tips, Elvis realized. This was someone performing for survival. Not financial survival, though that might be part of it, but the kind of survival that happens when music is the only language you have for the things too big for words. "Here, Mr. Presley," Joe said, pulling up to the curb near the intersection where a small crowd had gathered. Elvis's hand was already on the door handle. He needed to see who was making this music. He needed to understand how someone he'd never heard of could remind him so powerfully of why he'd fallen in love with music in the first place. Because for the first time in years, sitting in that Cadillac on Beale Street, Elvis Presley felt like he was about to discover something that might save him from drowning in his own success. He had no idea he was about to meet the person who would change both their lives forever. The moment Elvis stepped out of that air-conditioned Cadillac, Memphis hit him like a wall of heat and humidity, but he barely noticed. His entire focus was locked on the young man sitting cross-legged on a piece of cardboard, cradling a guitar that had seen better decades. David Collins looked like he was maybe 18, maybe younger. His dark hair hung past his shoulders, and his clothes told the story of someone who owned exactly what he was wearing. The guitar case in front of him held maybe $3 in crumpled bills and loose change. But when he opened his mouth to sing, poverty became irrelevant. Elvis had heard Amazing Grace performed by the greatest gospel singers alive. He'd recorded spiritual songs with professional choirs and world-class musicians. But this kid, this homeless kid, sitting on Memphis concrete, was teaching him something about grace he'd never understood. The way David sang, "I once was lost, but now am found," wasn't just reciting lyrics. This was testimony. This was someone who knew what lost felt like, who understood that being found wasn't just a religious concept, but a daily necessity for survival. Elvis moved closer, and suddenly he could see himself 20 years ago. Not the polished version the world remembered, but the terrified kid from Tupelo who walked into Sun Records because music was the only thing that made sense in a world that didn't seem to have a place for him. That's what was happening here. David wasn't performing for the small crowd that had gathered. He was using music the way other people used prayer, the way some people used medicine. This was healing happening in real time, set to melody. The guitar work was extraordinary. Self-taught, Elvis could tell, but with an intuitive understanding of how to make an instrument sing that couldn't be learned in any classroom. David's fingers found notes that shouldn't have worked together, but created harmonies that made the familiar hymn feel like it was being born for the first time. Then their eyes met. David's voice faltered for just a second as recognition dawned. You have to understand. This was 1974. Elvis Presley didn't just walk down random Memphis streets. He was the most famous person in the world, and he was standing 5 feet away from a homeless teenager, listening like his life depended on it. "Sir," David said, his voice carrying that particular mixture of disbelief and respect that Elvis hadn't heard in years. Not the manufactured deference of industry people who needed something from him, but genuine human recognition. "Aren't you Elvis Presley?" Elvis stepped closer, extending his hand. "I am, son. And you are one hell of a musician. What's your name?" "David Collins, Mr. Presley. I can't believe you're here. I can't believe you stopped to listen." But Elvis was studying David's face, and what he saw there changed everything. This wasn't starstruck excitement. This wasn't someone seeing an opportunity. This was an artist recognizing another artist, and the validation in David's eyes was the same validation Elvis had craved his entire career. "David, I've been making music for 20 years, Elvis said. "I've worked with everyone you can imagine. What I just heard you do with that song moved me more than anything I've experienced in a recording studio in I don't know how long. Where did you learn to play like that?" The question lit up David's face with the kind of joy that comes from having your deepest passion acknowledged by someone whose opinion matters beyond measure. "I taught myself, Mr. Presley. Been playing since I was 8. I've been traveling around, learning from whoever would teach me. Music is—" David paused, searching for words. "Music is the only thing that makes sense to me. It's the only way I can say what I'm really thinking about life." Elvis felt something break open in his chest. When was the last time he'd talked about music like that? When had he stopped thinking of it as communication and started thinking of it as commodity? "Where are you staying, David? Do you have somewhere safe tonight?" Question embarrassed the kid. Elvis could see it. But David answered honestly, without self-pity or manipulation. "I stay at the Y when I have enough money. Sleep in the park when I don't. As long as I have my guitar, I'm okay." That was the moment Elvis made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "David, I want you to come with me to Graceland, right now. I want to hear more of your music, and I want to talk to you about what you're trying to accomplish with your art." The words came out of Elvis's mouth before he'd fully thought them through, but the moment he said them, he knew they were right. This wasn't charity. This wasn't some celebrity good deed for the cameras. This was artistic necessity. David's eyes went wide, but his response revealed everything Elvis needed to know about his character. "Mr. Presley, I'd be honored to play music with you, but I don't want you to feel like you have to help me just because I'm struggling. I'm not looking for a handout. I just want to make music." Elvis smiled for the first time in weeks. Real pride, real integrity, just like he'd hoped. "Son, this isn't about charity. This is about music. When I hear real talent, I recognize it, and I think we might be able to learn from each other." What happened over the next 6 hours at Graceland became the stuff of music legend, though almost nobody knew about it at the time. Picture this: the king of rock and roll and a homeless teenager, sitting in Elvis's living room, trading songs like old friends. David played his originals, songs about life on the streets, about faith tested by hunger, about hope surviving when everything else fails. Elvis shared stories about his early days, about the fear and excitement of those first recordings, about the pressure of staying authentic when the whole world is watching. But here's what made it extraordinary. David's music reminded Elvis of something he'd lost. The kid's approach was rooted in traditional blues and gospel, just like Elvis's had been. But David wasn't trying to recreate the past. He was using those foundations to say something completely new about modern struggles, about what it meant to search for meaning in a world that seemed to have forgotten what meaning looked like. Elvis found himself energized in ways he hadn't been in years. David's perspective on music as spiritual necessity rather than commercial product challenged everything Elvis had been told about his career lately. Here was someone willing to live in poverty rather than compromise his artistic vision. Someone who played music because he had to, because it was essential to his survival. "David," Elvis said during a break, "you've reminded me of something I'd almost forgotten. You've shown me what it looks like to make music because you need to, because it's who you are, not because it's what people expect or what will sell records." David was amazed that Elvis Presley would say such a thing to him. "Mr. Presley, you've been my hero since I was little. Your music taught me it was possible to be honest and still reach people. I've always tried to follow your example of staying true to yourself." But Elvis wasn't finished. As the evening progressed, he made decisions that would transform both their lives. First, he offered to help David record professional demos of his original songs, using Graceland's home studio and Elvis's industry connections to make sure the right people heard David's talent. But more than that, Elvis invited David to stay at Graceland while they worked on the recordings. Safe housing, regular meals, access to equipment, everything David needed to develop his artistry without worrying about where his next meal was coming from. Most importantly, Elvis offered to mentor David, sharing his decades of industry experience while learning from David's fresh perspective and authentic approach to songwriting. The recording sessions that followed produced some of the most powerful music ever recorded at Graceland. David's original songs, dealing with homelessness, social justice, and spiritual searching, were enhanced by Elvis's production expertise while maintaining the raw honesty that had originally caught Elvis's attention. But here's the real miracle. Working with David's material reignited Elvis's own passion for music. For the first time in years, Elvis was approaching songs with the same freshness and authenticity that had made his early career so revolutionary. David's perspective on the social responsibility of musicians inspired Elvis to consider how he might use his platform to address real issues, to help people facing the same challenges David had overcome. This wasn't just mentorship. This was mutual artistic resurrection, sparked by one moment of recognition on a Memphis street corner. Within 6 months, David Collins went from sleeping in Memphis parks to signing with a major record label. But that's not the real story. The real story is what happened to Elvis. For the first time in years, the king of rock and roll remembered why he'd started making music in the first place. Those recording sessions with David didn't just produce an album. They produced a revolution in Elvis's own approach to his art. He started seeking out songs that meant something again. He began pushing back against the industry executives who'd been steering his career towards safe commercial territory. The demo recordings that emerged from their collaboration were immediately recognized as something extraordinary. David's songs, enhanced by Elvis's production expertise, demonstrated a level of artistic sophistication that impressed even the most jaded record label executives. But more importantly, they proved that authentic artistic expression could transcend economic and social barriers. David's success story became legendary. The homeless street musician who caught Elvis Presley's attention and transformed his life overnight. But David never forgot the values that had attracted Elvis's attention in the first place. He continued writing and performing music that addressed social issues, using his new platform to raise awareness about homelessness and poverty. Elvis, meanwhile, experienced his own transformation. The mentorship program he established at Graceland became a model for how successful artists could nurture emerging talent while revitalizing their own creative processes. He started actively seeking out musicians who were being overlooked by the traditional industry networks. Artists whose authenticity reminded him of what music could be when it came from genuine human experience rather than market research. But here's what makes this story truly remarkable. It almost didn't happen. Think about how many talented people we walk past every day without really hearing them. How many potential David Collins are out there right now, playing on street corners, hoping someone will stop long enough to really listen. Elvis Presley, at the height of his fame and the depth of his artistic crisis, was stuck in traffic and could have easily told his driver to turn up the radio, close the windows, ignore the street musician like everyone else did. Instead, he made a choice that changed 2 lives and influenced the direction of popular music. The legacy of that August afternoon continues to inspire musicians and music lovers who understand that the most important discoveries in art often happen when we stop our busy routines long enough to really hear the authentic voices around us. Music historians now cite the Elvis-David Collins collaboration as a pivotal moment that demonstrated how true artistic greatness emerges not from commercial calculation, but from genuine human connection. Their partnership proved that meaningful music could be found anywhere, created by anyone, if someone with the power to help was willing to listen. Years later, David Collins would say that the most important thing Elvis taught him wasn't about the music industry or recording techniques. It was about the responsibility that comes with having a platform. Elvis showed him that success meant using your voice not just to express your own truth, but to amplify the truths of others who might not otherwise be heard. For Elvis, discovering David was like rediscovering himself. It reminded him that his greatest contribution to music wasn't his fame or his commercial success. It was his ability to recognize and nurture authentic artistic expression, whether in himself or others. The story of Elvis stopping everything to listen to a homeless youth playing guitar reminds us that talent doesn't always come with credentials. Genius doesn't always wear expensive clothes or perform on famous stages. Sometimes the most profound artistic experiences are happening right in front of us, waiting for someone to care enough to stop and listen. That moment on Beale Street proved that when authentic talent meets genuine recognition, magic happens. Not the manufactured magic of the entertainment industry, but the real magic that occurs when human beings connect through the universal language of music. The question is, what amazing voices are we missing because we're too busy, too distracted, or too certain we already know where great art comes from? If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who needs to remember that extraordinary things can happen when we take time to really listen. What hidden talents have you discovered in unexpected places? Let us know in the comments below.